The award-winning Cabernet Sauvignon went down smooth, but the lump in my throat was stronger than any vintage. There I was, at the launch event for our new Redwood Reserve line, a project I'd poured 2 years of my life into, from selecting the grape varietals to designing the elegant label now gleaming in the guests' hands. My grandparents' small, struggling vineyard, which barely paid its own bills, was now Redwood Creek Vineyards, a name starting to make waves in wine enthusiast circles. And all of it, every drop of sweat, every late night hunched over spreadsheets and fermentation charts, was mine. My father, Arthur, raised his glass, a proud smile that warmed me for a fleeting moment. But then he rested his hand on Leo's shoulder, my younger brother, who until last week was more concerned with which weekend party he'd hit than the terroir of any vineyard. And to lead our national expansion, my father announced, his voice thick with an emotion that wasn't for me, who better than my son Leo to take over as director of sales? The world around me seemed to fall silent except for the ringing in my ears. Leo? Who could barely tell a Merlot from a Malbec? I was the one with the detailed expansion plan, who'd negotiated with distributors and researched every potential market. I was the one who transformed my grandfather's passion into a business grossing nearly $2 million annually. His smile at me was quick, almost a, "You get it, right?" But I didn't get it. Years of dedication slipping through my fingers like sand. The murmurs of congratulations for Leo hit me like slaps. He lowered his gaze, feigning a modesty I knew was pure theater. My stomach churned, but life on the vineyard had taught me to be tough. I smiled back, as if those words hadn't just pierced straight through me, unraveling 12 years of my life's work. This wasn't just an event, it was a celebration of what I had built. And in that instant, my work became just a stepping stone for the heir's ascent. My mother Eleanor shot me a look from across the room. There was a sadness there, a silent understanding. She always knew how much I dedicated myself, how much I loved Redwood Creek Vineyards. But as always, she wouldn't interfere. She never did when Arthur's decisions leaned heavily towards the male side of the family. And my father? He was still there, beaming, oblivious to the storm his words had just unleashed within me. Leo met my gaze, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of triumph on his lips before he masked it. It was right there, in that instant, that it fully sunk in. This wasn't just an impulsive decision by my father. Leo had been waiting for this. He'd nestled himself under Dad's wing, posing as the prodigal son who had finally matured for the family business. And my father, with his mindset that the son carries on the legacy, saw no flaw in his logic. A daughter? Oh, a daughter's effort is always supportive. A temporary help, never the definitive leadership, no matter how competent she is. What they didn't realize, what neither of them considered, was that I'd spent those 12 years not just growing grapes and building a brand, but also weaving a safety net, ensuring my influence ran deeper than they ever dreamed. Tomorrow morning, they would discover the true proof of my resolve. Sleep was a luxury I didn't afford myself that night. Every sacrifice, every trade show where I'd set up our humble booth, every late night developing labels and marketing strategies, all replayed in my mind. I'd given my youth to Redwood Creek Vineyards, and now they expected me to just hand over the keys and retreat to a secondary role? Not a chance. They had sorely underestimated me. By 4 a.m., I was already in the small office I'd set up in the farmhouse, the familiar scent of oak barrels and damp earth enveloping me. My fingers flew across the laptop keyboard. Every contract for organic grape supply I'd negotiated, every trademark registration for our special cuvées, every exclusivity agreement with high-end restaurants and wine shops. I knew the secrets of Redwood Creek Vineyards like the back of my hand. Leo thought he was going to waltz in, sit in the big chair, and reap the rewards, that by next week his name would be on new business cards as director of sales. Little did he know that while my father was busy with public relations and my brother was pretending to learn the basics of viticulture, I was securing something far more valuable: control over the core elements of our success.
Promptly, at 8:15, I pulled my truck into the vineyard's gravel driveway. The same stone-clad winery, the same earthy aroma in the air, the same hum of employees starting their day. But today the air felt different. I wasn't going to my usual office. I was walking onto a battlefield. The tasting room, usually a hub of cheerful activity, was eerily quiet. The staff's glances were hesitant, almost guilty. News of Leo's promotion must have already spread throughout the vineyard. No one met my eye directly. I kept my posture firm, the sound of my boots clicking on the polished concrete floor. Never let them see you shaken. I walked into the conference room, the only space to accommodate what I had to say, and closed the door. I had exactly 10 minutes before Arthur and Leo arrived, imagining they were just going to formalize the new structure. 10 minutes before their house of cards came tumbling down. I sat at the head of the table, took a deep breath, and turned on the projector. The screen lit up with a series of documents, contracts, intellectual property registrations, investment spreadsheets, things they'd never bothered to understand, assuming they were just operational details. I opened the file, labeled Redwood Creek Vineyards Brand and Shareholder Agreements, and I waited. Precisely at 8:30, there was a knock on the door. I didn't bother to answer. The door swung open, and in they walked. My father, with his air of vineyard owner, and Leo, in a new suit that looked a tad too big for him, a smug grin plastered on his face. I almost laughed at the sight.
"Claire," my father began, in that voice of someone doing me a great favor, "I assume you're aware of the reorganization we're implementing, correct?" Reorganization, a fine word for a takeover. "I'm aware, Dad," I replied, leaning back in my chair, my tone smoother than the steel I felt in my spine. I glanced at Leo, whose smirk only widened. "Good," my father continued. "Leo will be taking over as director of sales. We'll need you to help him with the transition, pass on all the contacts, the strategies, before you, well, move on to your new assignments." I raised an eyebrow. "New assignments?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "Dad, I think there's a misunderstanding here." His face twitched slightly. He was used to my compliance. "Claire," he said, his voice tighter, as if speaking to a stubborn child, "this isn't up for discussion. The decision has been made." It was then that I smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Oh, I know it has, Dad," I said, still softly. "The trouble is, you don't have the authority to make that decision alone." Leo scoffed. "Claire, don't make this difficult. We're trying to do this the easy way." I didn't respond. I just picked up the remote and clicked. The screen behind me displayed the document I'd been reviewing. Redwood Reserve Brand Creation and Royalty Agreement, signed August 17th, 2019. Signatories Claire Thompson, Arthur Thompson. My father's face lost some of its color. I turned to Leo. "Do you even know what this document is?" He crossed his arms, uncomfortable. "A brand agreement?" he hazarded. "Exactly," I nodded. "And do you know what it says?" I tapped the screen, highlighting a crucial clause. This document was drafted when we trademarked the Redwood Reserve line, which now accounts for 60% of our revenue. It stipulates that any strategic decision regarding the marketing and expansion of lines created and trademarked by me, including the appointment of directors for those areas, requires my formal approval as the rights holder of creation and principal investor in these lines. Furthermore, I projected another document. The contracts with our 3 largest national distributors were negotiated and signed by me, tying the maintenance of terms to my direct management of those accounts. And I, Dad, hold 100% of the rights to Redwood Reserve and am the primary manager of these key contracts. The silence in the conference room was so thick you could cut it with a vine knife. My father's expression hardened. "That's impossible," Leo muttered, stepping forward to read the document on the screen, as if his eyes could change the printed words. "Actually, it's quite possible," I replied, my voice firm. "You see, while you were busy trying to get your indie band off the ground, and Dad was focused on being the ambassador of Redwood Creek at social events, I was doing something else.
I was securing the future and integrity of what I created. I leaned forward. Remember when we needed capital to import those special French oak barrels in 2020, Dad? And I put in my personal savings? The agreement was clear. Full control over the lines utilizing that investment. And in 2022, when we had that legal dispute over the patent for one of our dessert wines, and I covered all the legal consulting and costs, once again, I strengthened my position on the products I developed. My father's jaw was clenched, but Leo was starting to panic. You're bluffing, he sputtered. I pulled a folder from the table and slid it across the polished wood towards him. Here are the notarized copies of all the trademark registrations in my name, the investment contracts, and the distributor agreements. Care to verify? He snatched the papers, his eyes scanning the clauses, his face draining of color with every line. You can't do this, he stammered, turning to his father. Dad, tell her she can't do this. My father remained silent, because he knew. I had legally outmaneuvered him with the very tools he taught me to value: hard work and impeccable documentation. I took a deep breath, standing up. I'm not firing you, Leo. I don't want to throw you into the job market unprepared, but you will report to me as an assistant for new market development with a salary commensurate with that role. You'll learn the business from the ground up, just like I did. Otherwise, I gestured towards the door, you're free to go find another gig for your band. Leo still clutched the documents, his knuckles white. My father stood rigidly beside him, his gaze lost, as if he trying to recalculate a route that no longer existed. I had spent years preparing, not because I expected such a betrayal, but because life in the vineyard and in business had taught me never to assume loyalty when power was involved. For the first time in my life, my father looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. Perhaps he never truly had. So, that's it? Leo finally managed to say, his voice laced with childish bitterness. You're just taking everything? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Taking everything? I repeated, stepping closer to him. Leo, I built this winery from the soil up. Every contract, every award, every new market opened. I made it happen. While you were busy worrying about your guitar tuning, I was ensuring this company not only survived, but thrived. So no, I'm not taking anything. I'm just keeping what's already mine. His face twisted in anger, but he had no rebuttal. He knew I was right. And worse, so did my father. He'd spent years believing blood was thicker than competence, that the son would inherit what, by right of effort and result, was mine. He underestimated me, and now he was paying the price for that miscalculation. My father finally broke the silence. You're making a mistake, Claire. His voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the strain underneath. A family should stick together. Do you really want to burn this bridge?
I met his gaze head-on. Dad, I said slowly, you set fire to this bridge the moment you made your decision without even consulting me. His lips pressed into a thin line. The business is bigger than just one person. We can find a solution that works for everyone. I tilted my head, feigning consideration. Oh, I agree. That's why I'm offering you both a choice. Leo stormed out first without a backward glance. Good riddance. I knew my brother well enough to predict his next move. He'd run to our uncles, to family friends, painting himself as the poor victim of an ambitious, treacherous sister. I didn't care. I wasn't there to win a popularity contest. I was there to secure my future. My father lingered a moment longer, as if waiting for me to change my mind, for a shred of guilt to make me back down. When he saw that wasn't happening, he just nodded slowly. You've changed, he said, almost in a whisper. I met his gaze. No, Dad, I just finally stopped pretending I didn't see certain things. Then he left. I exhaled, sinking back into the chair that now more than ever was mine. I should have felt victorious. I had fought for my place and won. But as I stared at the empty doorway, I felt something else too. A persistent, quiet ache. A part of me had always wanted my father's approval. That small, stubborn part that believed if I worked hard enough, if I proved my worth over and over, he would finally see me. But the truth is, he never really looked. And now he had no choice but to see me for who I really was.
Not his dutiful daughter, not his temporary stand-in, the true leader of Redwood Creek Vineyards. I turned back to my computer, my focus shifting. I had spent 12 years building this company. Now, I would spend the next 12 making it untouchable. My father and brother had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. For the first time in 12 years, the office felt empty. No calls from my father demanding reports he barely read. No passive-aggressive emails from Leo asking for help with tasks he should have been doing. Just silence. But silence didn't mean peace. It meant the battle for hearts and minds had begun. I knew my father wouldn't go down quietly, and Leo? He'd fight tooth and nail, or rather with gossip and lamentations, to try and reclaim what he considered his birthright. I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. It was just beginning. The next morning, the atmosphere at Redwood Creek Vineyards was palpable. Employees who'd greeted me with smiles and requests for guidance the week before now seemed to be walking on eggshells, afraid to pick a side. Some of our longtime cellar masters, men who had worked with my grandfather, avoided my gaze. I knew it was happening. Arthur and Leo were working the Whisper Network. Old family friends who held some minority shares, production managers, even some long-standing suppliers. They were sowing doubt, painting me as the ungrateful, cold daughter who had staged a coup against her own father and brother. Leo especially had taken on the role of the wronged party, the heir cheated by his sister's greed. I could almost hear him with that whining voice telling our sales reps how I had stolen his chance to prove himself. And my father? He wouldn't need to say much, just a heavy sigh, a shake of the head, and the carefully chosen words, "I only wanted what was best for my children, for the future of Redwood Creek Vineyards." It was a calculated, dangerous tactic, because if they managed to turn our key employees and the few minority shareholders against me, they could try to force a vote, create a stalemate, make my leadership a living hell. I wasn't going to let that happen. That afternoon, I called a general meeting with all department heads and longtime staff. As I walked into the barrel room where we'd set up the impromptu meeting, I felt the tension in the air. Half the room averted their eyes, the other half watched me with an almost morbid curiosity, waiting for a slip-up. I sat on a stool, facing them. My place. "Let's get straight to the point," I began, my voice firm, echoing among the oak barrels. "I know there's been a lot of talk, in the hallways, over coffee, maybe even at lunches with my father or brother." I let my eyes sweep across the group, pausing on each person long enough to make them feel seen. "I also know some of you are wondering if my leadership is what's best for Redwood Creek Vineyards." A few tensed up. No one spoke. I tapped my fingers lightly on a barrel beside me. "So, let's clear that up right now." I projected a simple presentation on the smooth wall of the cellar. Numbers, data, facts. In the last 5 years, under my direct management of product development and market strategy, Redwood Creek Vineyards has gone from producing 5,000 cases annually to over 35,000. Our revenue has quintupled. We've won 7 national and 2 international awards. We've opened markets in 3 new states and launched our first export initiative. I turned to old Mr. Henderson, our head winemaker. "Mr. Henderson, do we have any quality indicators, any production issues that suggest the winery is in trouble under my product vision?" He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and said in his gravelly voice, "Not a bit of it, Miss Claire. The wine's never been better and production is running like a Swiss chotch." I nodded. "So? Let's be honest about what's happening here." I leaned in. "My father and brother aren't upset because the company is failing. They aren't upset because I'm failing as a manager. They're upset because they expected me to just hand over a lifetime's work to Leo, regardless of qualification, regardless of results." The silence was total. Then I dangled the bait. "I also know that some of you have been contacted in the last 24 hours, perhaps with promises, with incentives, to question my continued leadership of the lines I created and that sustain this company." A few glances darted around. After a long pause, Bill, our logistics manager and an old friend of my father, cleared his throat. "I got a call," he admitted, his voice low, "from your father. He said he was thinking of reevaluating a few things with the other partners." I nodded, unsurprised. "And did he offer anything in return for your support in this reevaluation?" A pause, then a slow, uncomfortable nod. "There it is," I sighed, standing up. "My grandfather started this winery with a dream. My father kept it alive. But I took it further than either of them dreamed, and I will not allow it to be manipulated by vanity or tradition." I let my voice drop slightly. Controlled. Dangerous. If they want a fight, they'll get one. But it'll be a clean fight with numbers and results, not hallway gossip. I gathered my makeshift notes, looking each of those men and women in the eye. If anyone here believes my father and brother deserve control of the product lines I developed, which are the financial heart of this company, now is the time to speak up. Silence. No one moved. Good. I turned and walked out of the barrel room, my head held high. This wasn't just about keeping Redwood Creek Vineyards. It was about making sure they never again thought they could sideline me. That night, I made my own call, not to a minority shareholder, not to an influential distributor, but to an investigative journalist specializing in the wine and spirits industry, an old college acquaintance I knew to be relentless and fair. "Marcus, it's Claire Thompson from Redwood Creek Vineyards. I have a story for you, one that involves tradition, innovation, and a healthy dose of family drama with market implications." The next morning, the lead story in the business section of a major national news portal blared the headline, "Vineyard Uprising. Heiress modernizes award-winning winery and faces family feud over creative and commercial control." I had made my move. Now, it was their turn. And I was waiting. The day after the story broke, my inbox exploded. Emails, missed calls, messages from other journalists, from sommeliers, even from curious competitors. Some offered support, others were more cautious, but most had one question in common. Is this whole story true? I let the buzz grow. I knew my father's game. He had spent decades cultivating the image of the wise patriarch, the traditional winemaker. If he couldn't beat me on contracts, he tried to undermine my reputation. And that's exactly what he was trying to do, now with more fervor, feeling the public pressure. By noon, the counterattack arrived, an official statement, carefully worded, full of half-truths, issued by a PR flack Leo probably hired with money he didn't yet have. "Redwood Creek Vineyards has always been a family-run business. We regret recent internal disagreements, but remain committed to the values of unity and tradition that built this company. Leadership changes are natural processes, and we hope to conduct this transition as harmoniously as possible." Subtle. But I could read between the lines. Claire is impulsive. Claire is causing trouble. Claire doesn't respect her family. It didn't surprise me, but it infuriated me. I sat in my small office watching wine experts debate my stance on a local news channel. Was Claire Thompson too aggressive? Could this family feud tarnish the Redwood Creek brand? They talked as if I wasn't watching, as if I didn't already have my next move queued up. Because if my father and Leo wanted a public war, I was going to give them one they wouldn't forget. I didn't issue another statement. I didn't call a press conference. Instead, I made one more call to Marcus. I have another part of the story for you, and this one comes with documents. An hour later, I sent him old emails, financial statements from previous years, internal records showing how, before my direct intervention and investment, Redwood Creek Vineyards was struggling with debts disguised as long-term investments and outdated management practices I'd had to reverse and modernize, often against my father's wishes. The follow-up piece was out in less than 24 hours, behind Redwood Creek's premium labels, hidden debts, and a financial turnaround led by Claire Thompson. The article was brutally honest. It praised my vision for saving and boosting the company's financial health. It criticized my father's previous management, exposing the risks the company had faced. And, most importantly, it proved I was the main reason Redwood Creek Vineyards not only survived, but became a star. And just like that, the narrative shifted. The few shareholders who were still hesitant backed off. The distributors reinforced their support. And my father? He had nowhere left to hide from the truth. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was my father. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Claire," he said, his voice tired, almost a whisper. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my office chair, the scent of crushed grapes drifting in through the window. "We are talking, Dad." Silence. On the other end, finally, a heavy sigh. "You didn't have to do that, airing the family's dirty laundry like that." I let out a low, mirthless laugh. "Neither of you had to do what you did, either." "This winery was supposed to be a legacy," he said, his voice cracking. "For the family, for both of you." I felt that familiar pang, that tiny, foolish part of me that once dreamed of that too. But not anymore. "Dad," I said quietly, "if you wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me to lead it. Instead, you tried to take it from me." Another long silence. Then he asked, almost reluctantly, "So now what? What happens now?" I took a deep breath. Now? Now I had ensured they could never again touch what I built without my permission. The war of narratives was over. My father had lost. Leo, from what I heard, was already sounding out old contacts to try and land some consulting gig elsewhere, far from the vineyard dust. And me? I had won.
But as I sat there, in the heart of the winery, looking out at the rows of vines stretching as far as the eye could see, I felt no elation, no triumph, just a strange emptiness. I had spent 12 years fighting for Redwood Creek Vineyards, building it, protecting it, making it stronger than ever. And yet, the cost of that victory felt heavier than I'd expected. Because while I had secured my position, I had lost something along the way. My family, as I had known it. The next day, I walked through Redwood Creek Vineyards as if nothing had changed, but everyone knew the truth. The whispers had stopped. The doubt had faded. I was no longer just Claire Thompson, the owner's daughter who knew her wines. I was Claire Thompson, the woman who had faced down her father and brother and come out on top. Some respected me for it. Others, perhaps, feared me. And some still waited, perhaps, for me to stumble. I let them wait. At noon, my father and I met on the veranda of the main house for what would be our final discussion about the business. He looked tired, older, as if the weight of what had happened had finally settled on his shoulders. I waited for him to speak first. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "I'm retiring from winery decisions," he said simply, "effective immediately." I didn't react. I had expected this. "I'll sell my remaining shares to you on terms your lawyers propose. I'll keep a small, symbolic percentage as a silent investor. I won't be involved anymore." I studied him carefully. "And Leo?" His jaw tightened. "He's gone," my father admitted. "Took your buyout offer for the few shares he had in his name. He won't be back." A part of me had known it would end this way. Leo never had the backbone to fight his own battles. Once it was clear he'd lost, he did what he always did. He ran. Still, hearing it aloud made something inside me ache. Not regret, not guilt, just the finality of it all. I nodded. Understood. My father sighed, rubbing his temple as if he had a headache. Then, after a long pause, he said something I never expected. "I underestimated you, honey." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest I would ever get. And strangely,
I found I didn't need it anymore. A month later, Redwood Creek Vineyards looked nothing like it had before. The few minority shareholders who had sided with my father and Leo, they sold their stakes or quickly realigned. The managers who had questioned my leadership, they were replaced. The company had always been strong under my product guidance, but now it was truly mine. And with that control came a new vision. I introduced winemaking processes and aging techniques my father had always rejected as too modern. I forged partnerships with chefs and sommeliers he called fad chasers. We expanded into lines of sparkling wines and organic ciders he considered a waste of good grapes. Within 6 months, profits soared. Within a year, we'd crossed the $3 million revenue mark. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to prove myself. I was fighting to build something no one could ever take from me again. A year after everything had happened, I met my father for coffee. It was the first time we'd spoken since his retirement. He looked different, quieter. He wasn't angry anymore, just accepting. I read about that new rosé blend you released, the one with a hint of Grenache. It was a smart move. I smirked slightly. I know. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There was no more tension between us, no war left to fight. Only the simple, undeniable truth. He had tried to sideline me, and I had proven him wrong. He raised his cup. To Redwood Creek Vineyards. This time when I touched my cup to his, I didn't feel anger or resentment, only peace. Because I had already won, and I no longer needed his approval to know it. As I sit in my office today, overlooking the vineyards that stretch out into the California sun, I think about the lessons this journey has taught me. That family can be your biggest challenge, that loyalty is an asset, not a guarantee, that power is never given, it's taken. But most importantly, that sometimes the best way to prove your worth is to stop seeking external validation and build something so strong, so undeniably yours, that they can never ignore you again. I have no regrets. Redwood Creek Vineyards is mine, and I intend to make sure no one ever forgets it.